the Fed being reticent to kind of make a bold move saying, wait, folks, things are different this time around?
I think you had a perfect example, though Tesla's a bit of an outlier in your previous conversation. Since when do auto companies go out and announce price increases?
Such a good point.
And I bet you it doesn't hurt them at all. So there is this kind of price volatility in the economy, up and down, but prices change more frequently. That's very new. We're out of that world where nothing changed at all for a very long time, or we just didn't notice it. So I think, look, I think as our economic narrator, the Federal Reserve, and it's important to have a story. They just don't have a story that describes this economy. They're still in the low and slow framework. It doesn't look like it fits.
One thing that didn't quite fit with me in terms of something that was new on my radar here after reading your story, Craig, is this idea of savings rates and how savings rates have shifted pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. And I'm wondering if this is like part of the whole YOLO, YOLO economy post-2020, where people are like, okay, well, I have money, I'm going to spend it. But talk a little bit about what the research says about how we're saving differently now.
Well, savings rate has dropped about, if I have this right, about 2 percentage points since prior to the pandemic. Nobody really has a good explanation. This could simply be, it could be a generational shift where the spenders coming on board are just spending more and they want experiences and things like that, versus people like me who still think precautionary savings are a good thing to have. So I'm not sure what it is. The other indicator we flagged, which I thought was very interesting, was wholesale inventories to sales.
Yeah.
So wholesalers want to hold more inventory. That's very interesting.
They remember what happened, Carol, in 2020 when everyone ran out of inventory.
Yes. I remember when there were blank shelves. Hey, listen, real quickly, 30 seconds. Craig, what are the implications of a Fed that, as our key economic narrator, may be slow to address a new reality?
Well, what'll happen is, and we've already seen it happen, is you get a lot more bond volatility. So if you call up the MOVE index on the Bloomberg, that too is trending at a much higher place than it was. And that's not good for you. It's not good for me. It's not good for people who are financing anything. So
yeah, and we've seen a lot of that. That's for sure.
Yeah.
What a great story. What a great read. And as we said, among our most read, and it is the Bloomberg Big Take right now on the Bloomberg terminal. Craig Torres, thank you. He is Economy and Federal Reserve reporter at Bloomberg News, joining us from our bureau in Washington, D.C. Carol Massar, Tim Stanovic, and this is Bloomberg Radio.
It's 3:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all pushing higher. Russell 2000 index of small cap shares in the red. Russell 2000 down now by 0.2%, but the Dow Industrials up 0.4%, up 160 points. S&P 500 index up 44, up by about 0.9%. NASDAQ, meanwhile, up 182. That is a gain of 1.1%. The NASDAQ 100 index up now by 1.3%. Tech giants leading gains in stocks at the start of a week that will bring a raft of central bank decisions from the U.S. to England and Japan. The 10-year yield at 4.32%, with a 2-year yielding 4.73%. Spot gold up 0.2%, $21.60 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude oil up 2.5%, 83.06 a barrel on WTI. Bitcoin is down 1.4%, 67,311 right now on Bitcoin. So this week, certainly in the U.S., all eyes on the Federal Reserve. Jay Powell's news conference on Wednesday. Claudia Sahm is a former Fed economist. She's the founder of Sahm Consulting and a Bloomberg opinion columnist.
My expectations of what the Fed is on track to do did not change last week. We had the second disappointing read on inflation. We also had the second disappointing read on retail sales. And Powell has talked about multiple times that the risks to the two sides of the mandate, the stable prices, the maximum employment, those risks are coming into balance. And we saw that last week.
Claudia Sahm was interviewed this morning on Bloomberg Surveillance. The Bank of Japan is poised to decide to end its yield curve control and purchases of risk assets. This according to Nikkei, without saying where it got the information. In the meantime, American stocks, they are flying higher, with the S&P up 44 now, up 0.9%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Carol Master along with Tim Stanovic. This story was reported out by our own Mary Schlangenstein. She reported on a company, it's called JSX. They're a Dallas-based airline, beloved by work travelers for offering convenience like a chartered plane at near business class prices, and instead of flying from packed hubs, it flies from sparse private hangars. In exchange for the amenities of a big airport, passengers get a lot of convenience. So in lieu of long TSA baggage screening lines, they get their bags swabbed for explosives and walk through a weapons detector. So it sounds like kind of move through kind of quickly.
Yeah, it's sort of like, I think, what people would argue. I mean, people who've flown it love it. I've talked to them. I haven't flown it before, but people absolutely love it. The thing is JSX is only able to exist thanks to what some airline rivals say is an FAA loophole. The founder and CEO counters that they're just annoyed that he's treading on their turf. We've got that founder with us, Alex Wilcox, founder and CEO of JSX, and Mary Schlangenstein, a Bloomberg News U.S. Airlines reporter. Mary recently, as Carol mentioned, wrote about the airline that's drawn this cult following. Both Mary and Alex join us from Dallas. Alex, we're going to get to you in just a sec, but before we do, I want Mary to kind of lay out her reporting here and explain this loophole, because, Mary, you've covered airlines for years. And rivals to JSX say that there's this loophole. Talk to us a little bit about how this airline is able to exist.
Well, basically, they put together two different types of certified air carriers, and they were able to mix, a public charter with what becomes a private charter with two different types of airlines and airline certifications. And basically, it lets them fly an aircraft with more seats, with up to 30 seats, but they don't have to have the normal TSA's training or scanning, They don't have to have pilots that are younger than 65. They can have pilots with less flight experience. And so taking advantage of those rules is what's raised some objections to JSX and other carriers like it, but it's also allowed them to operate.
All right, Alex, come on in on this, because regulators, knew what you were doing. They signed off. What do you say to some of these critics who talk about you maybe taking advantage of a loophole?
Well, I mean, I guess one person's loophole is another person's law, and it is just a law. It's 40 to 45-year-old established law. It's law that even American Airlines does, operates under, and they're the biggest complainer of the group here. American Airlines has a code-share with Contour, which is another Part 135 air carrier that operates exactly under the exact same rules with the exact same pilot experience requirements. They also sell tickets as American Airlines, but you actually wind up flying on Contour or Envoy or SkyWest or Japan Airlines or GOL in Brazil, which only has a 250-hour captain rating requirement. So this is the pot calling the kettle black. They just don't like us, and every argument they make against us is hypocritical when it comes to operations. And And a lot of the people that are commenting about safety and security really are not qualified to do so. So we're very proud of our achievements, our near decade of flawless operations, and we see this purely as competitive anxiety.
Alex, having said that, your success, sometimes success brings a lot more eyeballs, including those of regulators. Are regulators coming out to you and saying, well, wait a minute, maybe we need to rethink this?
No, I mean, there's been, because of the efforts of two Dallas-based competitors and their trade unions, they've been begging the regulators to pay attention to us. They went to the DOT, they got turned away. They went to the FAA, 80,000 of our customers came out in strong defense of us, and we turned them away. They went to the U.S. Congress in connection with the current FAA Reauthorization Act, and they tried to get us outlawed under the reauthorization. And politicians from both sides of the aisle who recognize the value that we bring to their communities rallied to our support. Again, now they're trying the TSA. They're trying to do it sub rosa with the TSA, with all kinds of baseless threats about security and terrorism and very irresponsible things that, frankly, as an industry, we've always agreed we would never compete on safety and security matters. And so Southwest and American Airlines have crossed that line. And that is a dangerous line to cross because it actually makes the entire industry less safe because it makes people unwilling to talk about safety and security in an open way, which is the way we make the system better.
Mary, I want to bring you in. You reported this out. You put Alex and JSX on our radar. So come on and ask Alex a question.
Alex, I wanted to ask you if you've heard anything from the FAA, if you've gotten any feedback from them in terms of the timing of their decision, and then also if you've heard anything from the TSA, which was expected to issue some proposed recommendations fairly soon.
Thanks, Mary. No, the FAA, has not communicated that they're going to be taking any action. They've got to read through those 70,000 comments first and obviously respond to the concerns raised in those things. And then if they're going to make a rule change, they're going to have to go through the regular administrative process to do so. So it'll be an NPRM, a notice of proposed rulemaking, that actually addresses whatever rule they may or may not make. We believe that if there are going to be new rules, they will actually be modeled upon how we operate today. We go well above and beyond many of the rules that do apply to us already. In some cases, we go above and beyond the rules that apply to the major airlines as well. And with respect to the TSA, they will respond to real threats from real bad guys and not from retired airline executives who are taking pot shots.
Hey, Alex, I should note that not all airlines have come out and been critical of your model. Investors in your company include United Airlines, JetBlue, Qatar Airways. So there are some partners that you have with major airlines. But I do want to know, do you have a backup plan at this point if the FAA were to come out and say, the way that you're doing it is actually not something that we want to approve? What would be your backup plan?
And for those who are actually listening on radio, you're smiling.
Thanks. Yeah, I know. I think there's a couple of things. But first of all, thank you for pointing out it's not the industry as a whole, because I think a lot of the coverage has made it seem as though every major air carrier is against us. And you're absolutely right. JetBlue and United Airlines and Qatar Airways are all investors, proud investors here at JSX. In fact, there's only two airlines that are really outspoken against us, and those are our Dallas neighbors here. American Airlines has a long and notorious anti-competitive history. They've been admonished very recently by a federal judge for what they tried to do in the Northeast as well. And Southwest Airlines, and they also put Legacy Airlines out of business about 20 years ago here in Dallas. And Southwest Airlines is very territorial about Love Field, and understandably so, because they got a 98% market share. So I think it really is not the industry. It's just American and Southwest, and it's provincial. It's related to Dallas territory. As far as a backup plan, look, I mean, they're not just going to wake up one day and say, hey, you can't do this anymore. They couldn't do that to us any more than they could do it to the industry. They could say, hey, you've got to do something differently on a safety or a security issue that we've identified and want you to address, and we'll just address whatever that issue is. But the real thing to know about this, and it's also left out of the coverage so far, is that there are only about 480 airports that the entire U.S. industry, major airline industry, can fly to. So if you're going to fly any major airline, there's only 480 airports across the United States. There are over 2,000 other taxpayer-funded airports that right now are available only to people that have access to private aviation. And so if you're going to outlaw public charter, on completely, then that means over 2,000 airports in this country will be left with zero access to the average consumer. Anyone that cannot actually buy a ticket, that cannot rent a private jet or own a private jet on their own, is going to be left to those 480 airports and the notoriously bad service that's offered at most of them by a lot of network carriers. So, the backup plan is that we're just going to comply with whatever we're required to comply with, as we always do. We're going to maintain our outstanding compliance and reputational history, and we're going to continue to focus on our customers. And if we focus on our customers day in and day out and on their safety and their security and their pleasure, then we're going to be just fine.
Alex, just got about 30 seconds left here. So I don't know, in a year, 2 years, I mean, if everything goes as you guys are moving along right now, how much bigger can you become? And just real quickly, I only got about 20 seconds.
Sure. I mean, as you covered, as Mary well covered, we expect to be at $1 billion run rate within the next couple of years. And, anything is possible once we achieve that. It could be public markets, could be maybe we buy someone here in Dallas.
Could you be bought by somebody too?
Or maybe we'll buy them.
Could you be bought by someone, though?
I mean, the company doesn't belong exclusively to me, so that would be a question for our investors.
All right, great stuff as always. Really appreciate it. Alex Wilcox, Chief Executive Officer at JSX, joining us from Dallas. And, of course, our Mary Schlangenstein, U.S. Airlines reporter at Bloomberg News, joining us from our bureau in Dallas. Mary, thank you.
Hey, let's go to Washington, D.C. now from Dallas and go to the bureau in Washington, D.C. for an update on world and national news. Amy Morris is standing by. Hey, Amy.
Hey, Tim, lawmakers working to pass the final tranche of spending bills for fiscal 2024 and avoid yet another government shutdown threat looming at the end of Friday. Bloomberg congressional reporter Eric Wasson.
There's 6 parts of this package, funding everything from the Pentagon to the Department of Education. One part of it is the Homeland Security bill, which has been really the big sticking point between Congress and the Biden administration on border.
Eric Wasson talking with Balance of Power host Joe Matthew. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has agreed to send a team of Israeli officials to Washington to talk about a prospective Rafah operation. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan.
President Biden asked the Prime Minister to send a senior interagency team composed of military, intelligence, and humanitarian officials to Washington in the coming days to hear U.S. concerns about Israel's current Rafah planning.
President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke by phone earlier today. Secretary of State Antony Blinken warning against disinformation campaigns by state and non-state actors through technology, saying that it's created more polarization in the U.S.
Our competitors, our adversaries, are using disinformation to exploit fissures within our democracies by further sowing suspicion, cynicism, instability, pitting one group against another.
Secretary of State Blinken making those comments at the Democracy in South Korea event today. Donald Trump says he cannot post a full bond while he's appealing New York State civil fraud $454 million verdict against him. The former president told a New York appeals court that posting bond for the entire penalty would be a practical impossibility. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
3:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got stocks pushing higher. Russell 2000 in the red, but let's head right over to the first word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. Here he is, Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, Charlie. That's right, U.S. stocks in the green, but off their best levels. The Dow's currently up 131 points. S&Ps are higher by 41, while NASDAQ rises by 1.1%. The U.S. 10-year yield at 4.33%. Gold is higher by 5. Oil trading in the green, but Bitcoin is lower by 1.4%. Among the main 11 S&P sectors, all were trading in the green, led by telecom and tech. And leaders to the upside in the Dow, Salesforce and Caterpillar, while Boeing and J&J led to the downside. In the tech space, Google and Apple rose on a report of AI talks. And in other news, the Nikkei reported that the BOJ to end yield curve control and ETF purchases on Tuesday. Wrapping things up, NVIDIA's AI event begins at 4 o'clock today. Live from the first breaking news desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Charlie?
Okay, we thank you very much, Bill Maloney. And to hear live breaking news over your Bloomberg, type SQUA, S-Q-U-A, on your Bloomberg terminal. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no.
Who's gonna drive you home?
Honey, please, I'll do the driving.
Drive on.
Excuse me, I want to drive.
It drives me crazy.
It's the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
Everybody, TikTok, as I like to say, TikTok, everybody. What do we got, about 18 minutes left in today's trading session?
We haven't talked about TikTok today.
No, how'd that happen?
Yeah, I don't know.
Felt like every day last week. Yeah.
We'll find a way.
The week is young, Tim Stenovic.
Yeah, see what the Senate does, right?
Yeah, exactly. Our next guest has noted, speaking of the markets, though, let's talk more broadly. Our next guest has noted this before, that it's not higher for longer, but longer for longer. And we're about to see this this week as we get ready for Wednesday's Fed meeting. So perfect guest to talk about the Fed and a little bit more.
Yeah, let's welcome back Amanda Gotti, Chief Investment Officer at PNC Asset Management Group. She joins us once again from Philadelphia. Amanda, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing?
We're doing really well. Okay, so we'll talk about the
I actually hate
Fed.
Mondays, so I'm like, really?
Yeah, but come on. By the end of Monday, Carol, you're like, oh,
everybody who hates Monday, raise your hand. Like, I mean, Amanda, how do you feel about Mondays?
Well, I love Mondays when I get to spend it with you, but that's a big exception to the rule. So.
Okay. Big exception.
All right, Carol, I know you want to ask about NVIDIA.
I do. I want to start there. We'll get into the Fed in a moment, but you had some thoughts on that. I'm looking at the notes that you shared with our producer, Paul Brennan. It's on your radar. It's on our radar. NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang expected to make some comments in a keynote today. Your commentary on this one, AI is much more than, I believe, one company is what you said, I think, right? Yes, sorry, I'm looking at my notes here. More than one industry, let alone one company. So do you think like the obsession that investors have with NVIDIA is a little crazy?
Well, it's a great question to start on, and I would say yes, in and of the moment, it feels a little bit of a frenzy, right? It does feel a little bit crazy, particularly when you look at some of these forward PE valuations, NVIDIA in particular trading at a quasi-monopoly valuation level. It's still very early days, right? We haven't seen the fundamentals outside of basically NVIDIA accelerate to justify some of these lofty valuations, but we really do believe in the AI story, and we think that this is really like the next innovation cycle. And so there's so much more to come from this. But I think in the moment, investors are really fixated on one stock, one industry, one company. And we need to think more broadly than that, I think, in terms of this secular theme.
Okay, so what is the best way to get exposure?
Except, can I just jump in for a second?
Please, go ahead,
Because I feel like, we talked about this earlier with, I think, our BI analysts, that NVIDIA is kind of in a league all its own, no? Outperforming the semi space, and for a good reason. Why fundamentally? So when do you, as someone who watches the market, say, okay, wait, this is a special company, and there's a reason why its valuation might be higher than the rest of the sector that it plays within?
Well, we're already saying that. Now, don't take this as run out and back up the truck and buy a lot of NVIDIA here, but we've already been saying it does stand in a league of its own. And, you know, the expectations from the street continue to be too low relative to the results that they're delivering. And so in an environment where there's a lot of FOMO, a lot of sentiment, a lot of hype around all things AI, NVIDIA really does stand apart from the rest of the pack in terms of being able to justify these valuations. We got a long way to go, right? And I think you saw a little bit of kind of tripping up of the performance in NVIDIA with other companies saying, well, we need to diversify away. We can't be beholden to NVIDIA. But I think NVIDIA is so far ahead of the pack that it's going to take a lot of time to diversify away from them. They have the edge in terms of technology. They have the edge in terms of supply. And so really, where else are you going to go in this environment? I think it's one to watch very closely.
Okay, well, also to watch is what Jay Powell and co. do starting tomorrow
Very nice
on Wednesday.
segue there.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So what is the important question that you're going to be asking, or what would you ask Jay Powell on Wednesday if you had an opportunity to chat with him?
I think the question is really not if they should pivot, but when, right? That's really the bottom line here. I think as you teed up very nicely in the beginning, I've been on this mantra of longer for longer. Everything about this monetary policy cycle, from tightening to easing, is going to take a lot longer than investors in the markets really want. I mean, I think the good news is that the business cycle has been extended. So soft landing camp, right, as opposed to hard landing, which is something we talked about a lot last year. But I think that first rate cut may be a bit more elusive than what investors and certainly the market are thinking. And the good news, bad news is the data is coming in stronger than expected. So we really do think time is on the Fed side as it relates to that first rate cut. That's important in terms of the market expectations.
Speaking of timing and elusive, is it elusive, that first rate cut, until 2025?
I don't know if I would go quite so far as to say it's 2025, but it's certainly not March and it's certainly not May, given what we're seeing in terms of economic data and then the choppiness around inflation data. I could kind of go either way about whether that first rate cut comes in June. I do think we will get a few cuts this year, right? We do have some cuts baked in, but I don't think the Fed needs to rush. They've been very vocal about not needing to rush. And I think the risk of moving too fast and cutting too soon is much bigger than waiting maybe a month or two.
So, Amanda,
market doesn't believe that, though.
That's true, right? Kind of has its own mind. Well, I'm looking at an S&P 500 that is up, about 8% so far this year. And I was just pulling up the NASDAQ 100, and we're looking at a gain of about 7% this year. And we pulled back a little bit from the highs and what felt like every day we were getting new records on these major equity averages. Having said that, when you say, and the thought maybe that rate cuts are happening later this year, do we get kind of a bifurcated market, so a market the first half versus the second half, or is a lot of it going to be priced in before we even get those rate cuts?
I don't know that it's a tale of two halves. We've talked about that in the past, that might be a dynamic in play. I think it's a very choppy, sort of range-bound market environment until we start to get some clarity around Fed policy. A lot of it is baked in. You know, we describe the market as being effectively priced to perfection. We pulled forward a lot of the benefits in terms of returns from a policy pivot coming out of the Fed. I think the key is really not so much that first Fed rate cut. It's really what happens to earnings growth. It's been very, very narrow price performance and also very narrow earnings growth performance. We really need to see a broadening to get this market rally engaged again.
How much more of a broadening? Because of the equal weight S&P 500 did recently hit an all-time high.
Well, that's not saying much, I don't think. Even
you want to
though
see more of
it
small
is,
caps? You want to see international? What do you want to see?
Yeah, I want everybody on the bandwagon here, and I think it's been very challenging to get.
Wait, are you making a value call? Are you making a value call right now? I mean, the call that everybody's been calling forever?
No, I am definitely not saying that. I think it's actually a little bit early for value, deep value, cyclicals, and the small cap end of the spectrum. We just haven't seen signs of life from an earnings perspective in those areas yet, but we're going to start maybe getting more interested in those areas as the year progresses. It's just been very narrow leadership, even more narrow this year than last year, and I think that's really, somewhat precarious in terms of keeping this market rally going here. We need broader-based participation.
All right, you made the Monday better. I'm just going to let you, thank you. So appreciate it. Amanda, be well. Have a great week. Amanda Gotti, Chief Investment Officer at PNC Asset Management, joining us from Philadelphia. Folks, we've got about 10 minutes left in today's trading session. Up about 40 points on the S&P 500, up 220 or a gain of 1.25% on the NASDAQ 100. Stick around. We're counting you down to the close in just a moment.
Your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. The head of United Airlines, Scott Kirby, has told customers that the carrier is reviewing a series of recent mishaps involving its planes, promising any lessons learned will, quote, inform our safety and training and procedures across the company. And with more on the United story, here's Bloomberg's Erica Herskowitz.
Charlie, in a note to passengers, Kirby said, unfortunately, in the past few weeks, our airline has experienced a number of incidents that are reminders of the importance of safety. While the CEO didn't detail the events, United earlier this month suffered multiple headline-grabbing issues in the span of just a few days, including an aircraft in Houston that ran off the taxiway into a grassy area. Another United plane lost a tire shortly after departing from San Francisco, while a Houston to Florida flight had to make an emergency landing after one of its engines began spewing flames. Last week, a United aircraft landed safely in Oregon with a missing panel. The FAA on its website says it's investigating 9 incidents this month involving United planes. Charlie?
And that's Erica Herskowitz reporting. We've got United shares. They are lower today on an update for the rest of the market. United shares down now by about 0.3%. The shareholder advisory firm Glass Lewis is recommending that investors in Walt Disney back the entertainment company's management in its battle with activists. In a proxy paper out today, Glass Lewis said investors should vote through Disney's slate of directors at the company's shareholder meeting on April 3rd. Shares of the Walt Disney Company, they're up now by 1.7%. And sources tell Bloomberg Apple is in talks to build Google's Gemini AI engine into its iPhone. And those are our top company stories at this hour. And this is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
All right, everybody, just about 4.5 minutes left in today's trading session. We're going to head over to our TV colleagues, count you down to the close on this Monday, which is going to be an interesting week because we've got that Fed meeting on Wednesday. Having said that, most read story on the Bloomberg in the past 60 minutes, U.S. two-year yields at 2024 high, as Goldman Sachs forecasts fewer Federal Reserve interest rate cuts this year. So it's top of mind, no doubt about it.
Yeah, the two-year yield rising 2 basis points from Friday's closing level reached 4.749%. That's the highest level going all the way back to December 11th. The yield on the 5-year note kill rose to 4.367%. That's the highest since November 28th. So is this all happening ahead of the Fed meeting?
Yeah.
We'll get an update on the summary of economic projections.
Right.
So, yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see what happens and see what we just talked about. I feel like we talked with Ira Jersey of our Bloomberg Intelligence team who follows the rates markets, all of the gyrations in and out, every minute move, if you will. But, we've had a lot of volatility. We've also seen some significant moves to the upside in terms of rates bumping up against some higher levels we haven't seen in a few months here. Having said that, he's still, I think, calling for, 3 rate cuts this year and then I think 4 in 2025. So
we'll see what the median says from the SEP.
I'm shocked. I don't know. I think it's hard.
What shocks you?
Well, just making a call out to 2025 but I get it. And
so much could change between now and then.
Right. Data dependent. And I also do wonder whether or not there's a recession somewhere in there. Is it really the soft landing? Do we stick? Does that stick as the Fed will be cutting rates, or does it because the economy is coming undone?
We had Craig Torres on the program, The Big Take, at the top of the hour, and he talked about in his piece, I encourage everybody to read it. It's really, really good. But a centerpiece of the piece was 2 companies talking about how difficult it is to find employees right now. And if we're in an environment where, we're still adding jobs every month, the unemployment rate remains below 4%, it's so hard to see how we'd be in a recession.
Yeah, exactly, right.
All that can shift on a dime, but, right now things are looking pretty good.
Well, and I think we've talked about this with our Mike McKee, this whole idea of can you be in a recession, have a recession with a strong, I don't know.
Strong labor market. You can't. No, you can't.
Technically.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, we're seeing some selling into the close. We're seeing equities take another leg down, still in the green across the board, but at our lows of the session. Right now, it's time to head over to our TV colleagues, Vonnie and Scarlett. We're going to count you down to the close. Beyond the Bell, folks, starts right now.
Of 1%. Let's get you closer to the closing bell with full market coverage right here on Bloomberg as we take you to the bell and beyond.
Beyond the Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
We're about 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Scarlett Fu and Vonnie Quinn here with you, counting you down to the closing bell, and here to help us take you beyond the bell with a global simulcast, Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec, and welcome, of course, to our Bloomberg Television, Bloomberg Radio, and YouTube audiences as we look through the trading day. And right now, the trading day feels like we're just waiting with bated breath for the Fed, for this NVIDIA conference.
Yeah, right. There's so many big things going on, right? We'll look for some headlines out of NVIDIA, but having said that, we have seen some selling, I feel like, in these last few minutes of trading when it comes to the equity universe, and we're pretty much at our lows of the session, so we're below a 1% gain on the NASDAQ 100, and I think one of the things that's been sticky all day, Tim, is what we've seen along the rate curve.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the 2-year Treasury note, we just talked about this, yields climbing to the highest level this year. The 2-year rose 2 basis points from Friday's level. We see the yield on the 5-year note at its highest going all the way back to November 28th. So we're waiting, but the bond market is sending a message about, what they think the Fed is going to do.
Higher for longer?
I've heard that before, Carol. Data dependent?
Yeah.
Well, we've so much news, though, coming up, right? So we have plenty of news coming from the NVIDIA conference. At least investors hope to think so. And then, of course, we also have the Bank of Japan later on, Scarlett.
Yeah, I'm actually setting up my monitor so that I can check as soon as the NVIDIA headlines cross. But the BOJ announcement feels like they've been inching towards that for the last couple of weeks. Certainly, they've been priming the market for this possibility.
Yeah, let's not forget, right? We're looking at global central banks, the cumulative activity of what central bankers, Scarlett, do around the globe and what that has on the global financial markets.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we are getting you closer to the closing bells. And Carol, as Carol mentioned, certainly losing some momentum heading into the close here with the S&P 500 only up by 2/3%. The Dow Industrial is gaining about 0.2%. That's where it looks like it's going to settle. And the NASDAQ Composite, the clear winner here, up by 0.8%. The Russell 2000, we should mention, losing ground, losing 0.7%.
All right, good to know. There's your big picture. And I'm going to stay with the big picture and the big caps, if you will. S&P 500, if I look at the individual members, Ronnie, you see 307 to the upside in today's trade. So some fairly broad-based buying, even though a little bit of selling into the close here. 194 names in the S&P 500 losing ground, 2 unchanged.
And I think what's obvious from the IMAP of the S&P 500, Carol, is that it's the more risk-on sectors that are doing so well. So you have information technology leading the pack. But, most sectors are in the green, except for the very defensive healthcare, real estate, industrials, and earlier the financials, although they picked up a little bit of steam towards the end of the session as well.
All right, guys, let's go to some of the individual gainers. And Apple, WOA, atop that list. We know there's been a lot of pressure under Apple shares, although at their highs today, they were up about 3%, finishing the day with only a 0.6% gain. That name, of course, though, certainly a standout earlier, but nonetheless gaining some ground here today, along with Alphabet, Google. I want to throw that into the mix because you have Alphabet among the top gainers in the NASDAQ 100 and the S&P 500 today. That name up, more than 6% in today's session. What's interesting, actually at the close, forgive me, about 4.5%. But what's interesting, we know the big story, right? It's been among our most read on the Bloomberg today. Our Mark Gurman, an exclusive breaking it. And this whole idea that Apple in talks to really build Google's Gemini artificial intelligence engine into its iPhone, according to those familiar. So we're talking about maybe some kind of big agreement once again between two companies that have been working together for a long time when it comes to search. So nonetheless, this caught our attention and really gave a overall lift, certainly to the tech trade in the Monday session.
You think they're friends again after being frenemies? Is that what's happening?
Well, actually, they've been friends for a long time on search, and they've been collaborating for a long time.
Yeah, they pay Alphabet billions of dollars a year.
But not on Maps, right? They went their own way on Maps.
Yeah, no, but it's interesting.
Frenemies is a good way to describe it.
I find the tech universe really interesting, right? Like these companies that compete, and yet they often sometimes find they need each other. But anyway, those two names definitely stand out. I did want to mention Tesla, if I may, before we move along. Number one gainer in the S&P 500. This one was up more than 6%. Forgive me as I was reading through my numbers. Out on X today, Elon Musk saying prices in the U.S. will increase by $1,000 for all Model Y cars. That's starting April 1st. We talked about it, some analysts weighing in on this. Maybe it's just an inventory thing, kind of working through some of those production levels. And Deutsche is saying that Tesla's preview of future price increases as an attempt to boost sales this month rather than a sign of solid demand, so something to keep in mind.
Increasing prices to boost sales. I haven't seen that one before.
I don't know.
Hey, it's good for margins. It's good for margins. I want to talk about some of the decliners. Super Microcomputer, you might remember this was added to the S&P 500 end of day Friday. Today was the first day it was included in the S&P 500. On a percentage basis, the worst performer on the day, down more than 6% today. I do want to give some perspective, though. Super Microcomputer shares are up by more than 250%.
How much are they up this year?
250% just so far this year. But still, I mean, it's notable that on the first day in the S&P 500, they're down. Worst performer. Abbott Labs shares falling today. At last check by close to about 3%. The stock fell on Friday close to 3% as well. That was in sympathy with Reckitt Benckiser, which saying following a lawsuit award. Analysts back on Friday did say that Abbott's sell-off is overdone. So it is notable that we're still seeing some selling in today's session after that news on a Friday. And here's a really interesting one. Fisker, speaking of EVs, the company is pausing production for the next 6 weeks as the EV maker looks to rein in inventory and avoid possibly having to file for bankruptcy. Shares fell today by another 15.5%. We should note the company did not make a required interest payment of about $8.4 million last week on its unsecured convertible notes that are due in 2026. So that certainly prompted some selling by investors. That was a regulatory filing that we got today. Fisker did warn that it may not be able to meet obligations to service its debt and could, quote, need to seek protection under applicable bankruptcy laws. This was an $8 billion company back in 2021. Now the market cap is down to about $85 million. Wow. Yeah, quite a sell-off that we've seen.
Shadow of its former self, really, when it comes down to it. All right, let's take a look at what happened in the yield space. We had declines in Treasury prices, not huge declines, and so therefore the move higher in yields is fairly small, but we're at some pretty key levels here. The 2-year yield at the highest level this year. As you know, traders betting on fewer Fed cuts this year. The big question is whether policymakers themselves pencil in fewer than 3 cuts this year. For the 10-year yield, approaching a key technical level of 4.35%. We're at a 3-week high there. Mike Wilson says 4.35%, Mike Wilson of Morgan Stanley, is a level that may disrupt the stock rally. It hasn't really yet, but we're getting closer to that point.
All right, guys, don't cheat, but the most read story in the past 8 hours on the Bloomberg, like here we are, Fed week, the Apple Google news, you've got the 2-year note at a significant level. There's a lot going on. Care to guess?
It has to do with a certain personality.
Good guess.
Yeah, we're kind of living in his world, aren't we? Elon Musk. This story is the most read on the Bloomberg terminal, and it has to do with his prescribed use of ketamine, and he says it alleviates periods of low moods, and is in the best interest of investors in Tesla and the other companies he runs. Like, you know, that was it about a month or so ago that Wall Street Journal came out with this story about some that were maybe concerned about investors in these companies that might be concerned about his drug use.
Okay, so he did give this interview on Don Lemon's new show that's on YouTube, also actually still on X, even though there was the whole contract conversation that we saw last week. Here's what Elon Musk said. What matters is execution. From an investor standpoint, if there's something I'm taking, I should keep taking it. He did say that he takes the drug as prescribed periodically to treat what he described as, quote, chemical tides that lead to depression-like symptoms.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely pertinent information, right? It should be out there and shareholders have the right to know, just like, you know, our employer would maybe perhaps have the right to know. I'm not quite sure how, you know, the law works in the United States.
Just another interesting chapter,
prescriptions,
right?
But
I think maybe there are questions about security clearance too, because of his involvement.
Stuff.
Yeah, because of, you know, as a government contractor with SpaceX, but he said he wasn't concerned about that.
I don't think he doesn't tend to be concerned about a lot of these things, but maybe they need to add another chapter to Walter Isaacson's book about Elon Musk when it comes down to it. The other story, Carol, that I thought was really interesting was about how budget hotels in rural Texas are jacking up their prices, asking for $1,000 because it's in an area where you could really get a good view of the eclipse.
We are all a good study of supply and demand, right? So that's where you want to go to see it. Like, I totally get it, right? That these guys are going to charge more because they can.
Okay, I have good news and bad news about the eclipse. Okay, I think we're all going to be on air when the eclipse happens here in New York.
Is that good or bad?
That's the bad news.
Okay.
So we'll be able to see it. The good news is for people who are in New York and don't want to travel to Texas, Vani will still see 90% coverage for the eclipse from this area. So it's actually a pretty good area to watch it if it's not cloudy. That's what I'll say.
You can actually buy a seat on an airplane, right? Delta is doing an actual eclipse flight. They're sold out, that particular one, but you could actually be in the air when it goes completely dark. And who wouldn't want to do that?
That's the way to do it, right? That would be really cool.
What if your flight's delayed? You do that? You're like looking forward to it, you plan it out, you get the tickets.
Then you got to watch it on the TV at the airport, with everyone else.
It could happen.
No ketamine needed.
Just wear your glasses.
Yeah, exactly, right? All right, guys, that's a wrap. Our cross-platform coverage, radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals. We call it Beyond the Bell. We will see you again, same time, same place tomorrow.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, as Tim kidded around yesterday, but no kidding aside, today is Global Recycling Day.
That was not yesterday, Carol. That was like
Oh, did I say
90
yesterday?
minutes ago.
I mean-
I don't know how you think time travel happens
I read it earlier.
in this studio.
I am having a really rough Monday.
Yeah, so I have bad news. That wasn't yesterday. That was just a few minutes ago.
It's right. It was just. We were talking about it with Abigail.
Yeah.
All right.
It's the beginning of the show.
I need some sleep tonight. All right. On that, though, it is Global Recycling Day. And on that, Bloomberg's Leslie Kaufman writing at the start of 2024 this year, here's what she said. It is no secret that recycling in America is broken. The Environmental Protection Agency estimates that the U.S. has a combined recycling rate of only 32% for materials including glass, plastic, cardboard, and paper. That figure reflects collections from industrial, commercial, and residential trash.
Well, yeah, I mean, not great news, not great numbers.
Doesn't feel good.
We're spending the rest of the program talking a little bit about what's going on, at least the next two guests who are with us, about what happens in the world of sustainability. First up is Tony Parada of PA Consulting. His broad area of focus is on sustainability, economy, and the organization works with companies and industries. He joins us from Westport, Connecticut. Tony, good to have you with us this afternoon. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. When you hear 32% when it comes to materials like glass, plastic, cardboard, and paper, that's from the EPA. Obviously not surprising to you because you work in this space. How do you think we get that number higher?
It's a massive opportunity. There's a number of ways that we can work together to get that number higher. First, technology, better mechanical recycling practices, leveraged by AI and robotics. Second, new recycling methods are coming on the scene. Things like chemical recycling that go beyond just mechanical recycling. And finally, what we're most excited about is a move away from plastics altogether into alternative materials. As low as those recycling rates are, it does represent opportunity, both for enhanced collection, but also a new world and a new horizon of new materials.
Well, Tony, you know what's interesting too, and I always feel like when there's money to be made, people kind of can go and do the right thing, or you know, tax policy can also make us do the right thing. What is it though that moves the needle the most? You know, in terms of sustainability initiatives, at least in your world, what you've seen that really kind of moves people, company, industries to do the right thing?
In the world of materials like plastics and aluminum and glass, what we've seen, especially here in the US, is a bottle return deposit system does a lot to move recycling rates upward. So here in the US and in my hometown of Connecticut now, we just raised the redemption rate from 5 cents to 10 cents. It's been unchanged for the better part of 3 decades, so that was a major move. Bills and initiatives like that do an immense amount to be able to increase the collection of those materials.
Is it just, I mean, is it kind of a waste of time for us to be talking about the consumer end of this? Doesn't so much of this happen on the industrial side of this stuff?
I would agree. If you take the mentality of I have a problem to solve, do I want to convince 3 billion individuals to quote unquote do the right thing, or would I prefer to convince 1,000 companies to change the way in which they go to market?
Well, what are the regulations around companies? Because it seems like that really is what moves the needle with this stuff.
Regulation is definitely the tip of the spear. There's been a lot of talk around extended producer responsibility and the cost that firms will incur as a result of manufacturing and producing these items. But again, major opportunity for the companies that get it right. At the end of the day, sustainability is, in essence, talking about using resources properly and that allocation of those resources. It means better business.
Hey, Tony, how has the recent news from the SEC and Chair Gary Gensler had an impact? I'm thinking about the SEC now forcing companies to disclose their greenhouse gas emissions for the first time, but we should point out, watered down a key requirement after there was some heavy lobbying from industry groups. But this alone, how might it change kind of the story and the impact and move us to a much more sustainable world?
Well, I think the story that we've seen unfold for the past 10 years is there is a real embracing of this concept, in particular by the capital markets. So the lack of a climate action plan inside a company is the lack of a business continuity plan. It makes you less investable. So by embracing the notion of sustainability, greenhouse gas emission, and being transparent in that data collection in your activity, in essence, as a leader of an organization, you're helping make your firm a more investable asset class, and you're future-proofing your own business.
Hey, I want to talk a little bit about other issues that we've talked about on our program when it comes to sustainability, and a lot of that has to do with sort of the effects that we're living with each and every day because of decisions that have been made in production over the last 50 to 100 years. We talk about single-use plastics and the idea that we're starting to see microplastics show up in places that we do not want them in. We talk about PFAS, these so-called forever chemicals, tainting water streams and the water that we're drinking just from the tap in certain areas. How do you think about all this stuff, Tony, and ways to kind of keep yourself safe?
So it's clear to a large number of us that the amount of plastic that we're producing at scale is just untenable. On top of that, to your well-made point, the medical community is stepping in and every week discovering more and more places that plastics in particular show up. What is heartening and promising is a whole raft of new technologies coming onto the landscape. So things like seaweeds, inalginates, and plant-based fibers are being used to replace plastics in particular. You've got companies like Not PLA. They won an Earthshot Prize late last year. PA actually helped them with their initial technology. We're seeing a whole revolution in the world of plant-based fibers. There's a technology called Pullpack, where they're using fibers to replace plastics of all kinds. So as disheartening as one may see some of the data look like, there are immense opportunities to be had and new technologies coming onto the marketplace every day.
Right. How quickly, though, can it change the needle? Like, I totally get into it. Bloomberg, very involved in the Earthshot Prize, as you know. But I still am surrounded by a lot of plastic. And if I go to buy anything, there are certain aisles in supermarkets and various stores that all it is plastic containers. So how do we, I talked about Gensler, SEC Chair Gensler. I mean, a lot of lobbying, and these are, whether it's the petroleum industry, the plastics industries, spend a lot in terms of lobbying. Their survivability is at stake, some would say. So how do you ultimately move that needle?
I would offer one example that just dropped last week, Keurig, the coffee company. They disrupted the world of coffee years ago with a single-serve pod. We all get to choose the flavor and the style and the amount we want in our homes. They just launched last week in the US a new product called the K-Round. It's basically a plastic-free coffee capsule that you can use in your home without the need for using plastics or aluminum. It's that type of innovation that will not only solve the material and the waste side of it, but I expect that to be a huge commercial and consumer success.
Wait, these are the ones you don't have to send these back to recycle, right?
No, it's literally a pressed coffee pod that's coated in a non-plastic coating. You drop that pressed coffee pod into Keurig's new machine, and you get the same amazing experience that we all come to know and expect, just without all the extra packaging.
Hallelujah.
There's some stuff that you just feel like can't be made in a sustainable way. Like Legos. The things I step on every day.
Tony, do you have a solution? 30 seconds left. Do you have a solution for something like Legos?
For Lego, not yet, but we should have those folks call PA and we can help them. The medical industry is moving more sustainably. That's another key area that's been problematic for safety reasons and regulatory.
Yeah.
But again, technology is here to save us. There's a lot of amazing discoveries on the horizon.
So when I really hurt myself on the Lego, I will be given a medical solution that will not...
You say sugar? Sugar?
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Shoot.
That's what you say when you step on a Lego.
Those things really, really, really hurt. Tony, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Certainly a space that we care about, and it was great to get some time with you. Tony Parada, he is sustainability and regenerative economy expert at PA Consulting, joining us from Westport, Connecticut. Those things hurt.
To be fair, they have been trying to make them more sustainable. They can't figure out any way to make, my understanding is they can't figure out a way to make them with a material that's not plastic, that has the same precision.
No, I get it, right?
Yeah.
And so that it's still a toy that kind of works. All right, more to come, folks. This is Bloomberg.
Right off the Bloomberg professional service friend, Cisco Partners buying JAMA Software for $1.2 billion. This according to a release from the company. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all higher today. S&P up 32, a gain of 0.6%. Dow Industrials up 75, up 0.2%. NASDAQ up 130, a gain of 0.8%. 10-year 4.32% with a 2-year 4.73%. Gold, spot gold up by 0.2% today, up $4 the ounce, $21.59 on gold. West Texas Intermediate crude oil up 2.4%, $82.95 a barrel. And Bitcoin down 1.8%, 67,080 on Bitcoin. NVIDIA's annual AI conference underway in San Jose. CEO Jensen Huang speaking right now. NVIDIA GTC, the company's graphics processing unit technology event, has quickly become a global AI conference for developers. It runs through March 21st. NVIDIA shares up right now by about 0.7%. Again, recapping, stocks higher. S&P up 32, up 0.6%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Well, there are a few certainties in this world, Carol.
Yes.
Death, taxes, and the styrofoam cup that you pour your hot water into when you make cup noodles ramen.
Totally get it.
We've all been there.
We've all.
Boil that water, pour it in the cup, get yourself some
Staple
noodles.
in college.
Yeah, who didn't survive on this stuff in college or at
We all
some
did.
point, right?
We all did, totally.
Well, I'm talking about it because it turns out that after all these years, Cup Noodles is finally getting rid of that polystyrene foam cup and releasing a microwavable paper cup. I've actually got it in my hands right now because Brian Huff is CEO and president of Nissen Foods USA. It's the maker of Cup Noodles. He's here with us in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studios. Brian, good to have you here. How are you?
I'm great. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much for joining us. So, first question, what took so long? Because we haven't been using this type of material and things for a long time.
You know, as we were looking at our business, and we obviously have had that styrofoam cup since 1973 when we started producing in California. So we continue to look to evolve the brand, to evolve the business. You know, and certainly the cup and the packaging is a big part of the brand. So we want to continue to lead in this space. And it was a great time for us to start to look at alternate materials, not only, you know, from a sustainability perspective, but also now it's microwavable.
Yeah, so was it a concern, did it take so long to make the change because you were concerned about changing the brand? And forgive me, I know you've only been at the company for a few months, so you can't speak to totally the history of it, but I'm just curious, you know, it's why a change like this comes now versus 20 years ago.
I think a big part of it was finding the right materials. So, you know, it's not as easy as just moving from where you were to paper in terms of how that product and that experience you have are. But secondarily is retooling our entire manufacturing process to be able to deliver something like this to the marketplace, which was a significant investment for us, but we think the right thing to do for the business and the brand.
Well, you know, and to be fair, like you said, only a few months at this company, but you were at Kellogg's for 24 years.
I was.
Like, you understand this consumer packaged goods space in a big way. You've worked at several different companies. I'm never quite sure what the margins are on these things, but to change packaging, like, what is it that in general kind of why it takes a while to make some changes in it? Is it like, walk us through it?
Well, I think ultimately, especially large consumer packaged goods companies, they're built on efficiencies and effectiveness. So our manufacturing plants are manufacturing about 900 cups per line per minute. So to be able to make a change, to have to shut down the lines, retool the lines, in this particular case, almost 7 weeks of not producing on our manufacturing lines, to be able to retool and rebuild the lines to convert from styrofoam to paper. So it's a pretty big undertaking.
So you have two factories here in the U.S., two facilities that make these. When you were retooling them, how do you make up for the factories that are shut down?
Well, ultimately, we moved from a 5-day schedule to a 7-day schedule, 24/7.
Sleep on the factory floors like Elon would do.
As you can imagine, and building up inventory and making sure we've got the right inventory levels around the country, pulsing the business as we could to make sure that we could make this move effectively and continue to service our customers.
And fair to say that the decision and the change was in effect or in process before you joined the company?
It was, yes.
But in general, I guess what I'm trying to understand, because you are someone who understands this space and have been in it for a long time, Brian, is that consumers, you and I talk about it all the time, Tim, and I know I've got a daughter who's about to be 21, and just like the importance of understanding what a product stands for, the materials, the impact on the environment. This is not a new discussion. So I'm just trying to understand, like, when does a company like Nissan or somebody else finally decide, okay, it's time for us to change this product because either consumers care or some other dynamic or financially it finally makes sense?
Yeah, and I think the way you suggest it makes perfect sense. It takes a while for you to continue to read what that consumer is saying.
Is it really but is it consumer-based that ultimately makes you guys make the change?
Well, I mean, I think it's consumer-based. Sometimes it's company-based as well, and what your company's values and mission are. So our company is doing business in about 100 countries, and I would say that in some countries they're much more progressive in terms of sustainability. Europe is a big one. So Europe is leading in this particular space, and the U.S. is probably behind in a lot of these different packages and packaging types. So for us as a global company, we spent a lot of time looking at our global footprint, looking at potential regulation that may happen over time, and for us wanting to be a leader in the space.
Talk to us, we're Bloomberg, so we like numbers here.
Sure.
Publicly held company, based in Japan, about more than $8 billion market cap at this point.
Yep.
Here in the U.S., how big of a market is it for your products versus other countries? I mean, how important of a market is the U.S. for Nissan?
It's becoming more significant every year, but the ramen category globally is almost $50 billion. So it's a very, very large category internationally and globally. Domestically, about $3 billion. So a sizable food category here in the U.S. And, we are starting to be a material part of the overall organization in the U.S.
That means that $3 billion, does that include CPG and restaurants?
It does not include restaurants.
So this is
that $3 billion is just retail.
Oh, wow. Okay. So that is pretty big.
All right. So I'm going to go there because I kind of asked you about it. So when do we get the sodium down? 50%. Like, I'm talking about what consumers want. Again, a younger, whether it's my daughter or other people, like, are looking at these things and being like, oh, wow, like taking a second thought. I didn't really think about it so much in college.
Did not cross my radar.
But I mean, and I know you said you guys are working on it.
We are. And there's a lot of good technology out there in terms of reducing sodium without lessening taste, right? So a big part of this is we are a product that is consumed each and every day, right? And consumers vote. And a lot of what they vote on is not only nutritionals, but it's also taste. So you have to have both. So we've got a global team in R&D. We also have a domestic team in California that's continually looking at the new technology of how that sodium hits your taste buds, how you can simulate a higher level of taste and flavor and reduce the sodium, and something that we continually operate and work on. And the product has gotten much better over time and will get much better in the future. But that's a great question.
Talk a little bit about product category in the U.S. and like the most popular products. I'm holding for people listening on radio, cup noodles chicken.
I'm really hungry.
I feel like
if I had hot water.
Yeah, if you don't need hot water. You just need water.
We've been on air for a couple of hours. We always get hungry around
there's
now.
hot water upstairs. You can go get some.
We love that, by the way. So thank you.
But is this the flagship product, the chicken cup noodles?
Chicken
in
cup
Nissan's
noodle
category?
is the flagship. Absolutely.
What portion of revenue does that account for the company for U.S. sales?
I want to say U.S. it's about 40% of our total.
Wow.
That's one
amazing.
brand. Now, there's multiple products within that brand, but that's total brand. Not just
total
chicken.
brand, not just chicken flavor.
Yes.
Okay, so it's and then the top ramen category too is certainly a big one for you.
Another huge category for us and great brand.
And that's sort of almost the remainder? Because
yes.
when I was struck by looking at the website how much the products haven't changed in a long time. They're still the classic products, which says, okay, wait a second, there is that loyalty here.
There certainly is, and it's
There's certainly other flavors. Don't get me wrong.
and it's an iconic brand. And as we innovate, we want to continue to keep innovating too on our traditional and our original. Which, in this particular way, we looked at packaging as a way that we continue to deliver new news and innovation.
That's what I was going to go to, right? We spend so much time talking about the tech world and the tech community and innovation, disruption. How do you guys think about it in the food space? What it means for you, where it is a well-known brand, kind of iconic if you think about.
Carol, there's a fan store where you can buy a Cup Noodles trucker hat and a Cup Noodles beanie.
Very cool, by the way. I should have brought one with me.
Yes, you should.
We're here next time, Carol. Okay.
But
I might get you some top ramen socks. Okay.
Just got about 45, 50 seconds left.
Oh, those are sold out. I'm sorry.
All right, stop. What's innovation or disruption for you guys as you think about this space?
You know, what we look at is when on a 3-year rolling basis, about 15% of our revenue actually coming from innovation. So we're continuing to look at other premium spaces that we can go, more different and unique ingredients. Certainly authentic Asian and hotter flavors today are big sellers. So it is a constant investment that we're making in innovation and truly is the future growth of the business.
We'd be remiss, we usually start this way, 20, 25 seconds. You are CEO of Nissan Foods here in the States and so on and so forth. How would you describe the global market environment, the economy right now?
I think the economy is really challenging. You know, I think there's a lot of mixed signals as it relates to the economy, but consumers today, especially in the U.S., are continuing to be, you know, are hurting. So for us, you know, we have seen some different changes in our channel mix. So we see more people moving to the value channels, the clubs and the dollar stores. We've got a big business in the value channel or dollar stores across the country. So we've certainly seen some of that migration, and we believe part of that is the economic conditions in the U.S.
That's fascinating. Great stuff. We covered a lot of ground. Brian, thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure meeting you both.
Same here. Safe travels home. Brian Huff, he's CEO and President of Nissan Foods USA, joining us here in studio.
Hey, let's get a check on the latest world and national news. Amy Morris is in the Bloomberg 991 newsroom in D.C. Hey, Amy.
Hey, Tim. President Biden spoke today with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The two leaders clashing over the war in Gaza. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan brought us some more details from that call.
President Biden asked the Prime Minister to send a senior interagency team composed of military, intelligence, and humanitarian officials to Washington in the coming days to hear U.S. concerns about Israel's current Rafah planning.
National Security Advisor Sullivan went on to say Netanyahu has agreed to send a team to Washington for those talks. President Biden signed the new executive order directing a set of executive actions to expand and improve research on women's health. He's calling on Congress to provide $12 billion for this initiative.
I'm directing the most comprehensive set of executive actions ever taken to improve women's health, ever taken. And I'm going to ensure that women's health is integrated and prioritized across the entire federal government.
The actions include directing federal agencies to prioritize investments in women's health research, strengthen data standards, and identify gaps in funding. Former President Trump is pushing back at the bond he'll need to post to appeal the $454 million verdict against him in the New York civil fraud trial. Bloomberg's Nathan Hager has details from Washington.
The former president told a New York appeals court today that posting bond for the entire amount would be a practical impossibility. He says it would require a fire sale of assets to come up with the $1 billion of collateral he says he'd need. Trump says he's approached about 30 surety companies through 4 separate brokers to come up with that figure. New York Attorney General Letitia James has asked that Trump's request to pay a smaller bond or no bond at all be denied. She says it's because he can't be trusted. In Washington, I'm Nathan Hager,
Global
Bloomberg
News
Radio.
24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg. Carol and Tim.
All right, Amy Morris, thank you so much. Now let's head to NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang. He is at the GTC conference, the company's conference in San Jose, California. He's making his keynote. Let's listen in.
Okay, so this is the Grace Blackwell system. But there's more. So it turns out, all of the specs is fantastic, but we need a whole lot of new features in order to push the limits beyond, if you will, the limits of physics. We would like to always get a lot more X factors. And so one of the things that we did was we invented another transformer engine, the second generation. It has the ability to dynamically and automatically rescale and recast numerical formats to a lower precision whenever it can. Remember, artificial intelligence is about probability. And so you kind of have, 1.7, approximately 1.7 times approximately 1.4 to be approximately something else. Does that make sense? And so the ability for the mathematics to retain the precision and the range necessary in that particular stage of the pipeline, super important. And so it's not just about the fact that we designed a smaller ALU. The world's not quite that simple. You've got to figure out when you can use that across a computation that is thousands of GPUs. It's running for weeks and weeks on weeks, and you want to make sure that the training job is going to converge. And so this new transformer engine, we have a 5th generation NVLink. It's now twice as fast as Hopper, but very importantly, it has computation in the network. And the reason for that is because when you have so many different GPUs working together, we have to share our information with each other. We have to synchronize and update each other. And every so often, we have to reduce the partial products and then rebroadcast out the partial products, the sum of the partial products, back to everybody else. And so there's a lot of what is called all reduce and all to all and all gather. It's all part of this area of synchronization and collectives so that we can have GPUs working with each other. Having extraordinarily fast links and being able to do mathematics right in the network allows us to essentially amplify even further. So even though it's 1.8 terabytes per second, it's effectively higher than that. And so it's many times that of Hopper. The likelihood of a supercomputer running for weeks on end is approximately 0. And the reason for that is because there's so many components working at the same time. The probability of them working continuously is very low. And so we need to make sure that whenever there is we checkpoint and restart as often as we can, but if we have the ability to detect a weak chip or a weak node early, we could retire it and maybe swap in another processor. That ability to keep the utilization of the supercomputer high, especially when you just spent $2 billion building it, is super important. And so we put in a RAS engine, a reliability engine that does 100% self-test, in-system test of every single gate, every single bit of memory on the Blackwell chip and all the memory that's connected to it. It's almost as if we shipped with every single chip its own advanced tester that we test our chips with. This is the first time we're doing this. Super excited about it. Secure AI. Only this conference do they clap for RAS. The secure AI. Obviously, you've just spent hundreds of millions of dollars creating a very important AI. And the code, the intelligence of that AI is encoded in the parameters. You want to make sure that on the one hand, you don't lose it. On the other hand, it doesn't get contaminated. And so we now have the ability to encrypt data, of course, at rest, but also in transit and while it's being computed. It's all encrypted. And so we now have the ability to encrypt in transmission, and when we're computing it, it is in a trusted environment, trusted engine environment. And the last thing is decompression. Moving data in and out of these nodes when the compute is so fast becomes really essential. And so we've put in a high line speed compression engine and effectively moves data 20 times faster in and out of these computers. These computers are so powerful and there's such a large investment, the last thing we want to do is have them be idle. And so all of these capabilities are intended to keep Blackwell fed and as busy as possible. Overall.
All right, everybody. You have been listening to NVIDIA Chief Executive Officer Jensen Huang showing off new chips aimed at extending his company's dominance of artificial intelligence computing, a position that's already made it the world's third most valuable business. And he was talking about Blackwell. That's a new processor design called Blackwell, multiple times faster at handling the models that underpin AI. The company, again, saying this, as you just heard, from the NVIDIA CEO at its GTC conference in San Jose. I am reading from the reporting done by our one and only Ian King, a story on the terminal as we speak.
Yeah, these Blackwell chips, Carol, are made up of 208 billion transistors. They're going to be the basis for new computers and other products that are being deployed by the world's largest data center operators. So that includes companies such as Amazon, Microsoft, Alphabet, which has Google, of course, and then Oracle. We should also note that Blackwell is named after David Blackwell, the first black scholar inducted into the National Academy of Science. It's got a tough act to follow because its predecessor, Hopper, fueled explosive cells at NVIDIA.
Incredible story. I do want to point out that shares of NVIDIA, they're just down a hair, 0.1% here in the aftermarket, so we're not seeing necessarily any market move. They closed up the session just 0.7%, but you know the story. Top performing name in the S&P 500 this year. It is up more than 78% here in 2024 so far, Tim.
We'll continue to bring you updates from NVIDIA. In the meantime, let's get on over to Charlie Pellet because it's a busy day and he's got a market update and everything happening after hours. Hey, Charlie.
Thank you very much. First trading day of the week. It was an up day for the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ. S&P today up 32, higher by 0.6%. Dow Industrials up 75. That was an advance today of just about 0.2%, while NASDAQ was up 0.8%. Tech giants leading gains in stocks at the start of a week that will bring a raft of central bank decisions from the U.S. to England and Japan. 10-year yield, 4.32% with a 2-year at 4.73%. Spot gold today also advancing. We had gold today up by 0.2%, 21.59 on the precious metal today. West Texas Intermediate crude up 2.1%, 82.78, and we had Bitcoin right now lower by 1.5%, 67,228 on Bitcoin. So an update for the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ. This in a week in which we'll be hearing from Fed Chair Jay Powell. As for the Federal Reserve and the pace with which it is moving, Amanda Agati is Chief Investment Officer at PNC Asset Management, and she was a guest right here on Bloomberg Business Week.
I do think we will get a few cuts this year, right? We do have some cuts baked in, but I don't think the Fed needs to rush. They've been very vocal about not needing to rush, and I think the risk of moving too fast and cutting too soon is much bigger than waiting maybe a month or two.
And you can hear more of that on the Bloomberg Business Week podcast. S&P up 0.6%, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much for that update, Charlie Pellet. Really do appreciate it. Carol, do you remember last month, just after Bloomberg broke the news that Apple was abandoning its EV ambitions, there was this collective sigh of relief from Tesla and Detroit automakers?
Yeah,
okay.
Right. They were like, whew, maybe we don't have to, taking some competition off.
Yeah, well, not so good news for them, okay? Because there's something else that perhaps should be keeping American auto execs up at night, and that's super cheap Chinese-made EVs.
Yeah, this is a big story. We love this story. Bloomberg News auto reporter Keith Naughton, though, writing about it all for Bloomberg Business Week, specifically that Chinese automakers are undercutting American EV prices by more than $50,000. Folks, you heard that right, more than $50,000. It could force Detroit automakers to pivot towards cheaper rides. Again, Keith Naughton reporting this out for us.
Hey, Keith joins us from Detroit this afternoon. Keith, how are you?
Just fine, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
We should know you do this for Bloomberg Business Week. You can read the story now on the Bloomberg terminal. It's also on Bloomberg.com, and it is in the forthcoming issue of Bloomberg Business Week, which is out later this week. Okay, so Keith, I want to talk a little bit about these cars because they're how do you make a $10,000 EV?
Like, are there seats in there? Is there a steering wheel? I mean, come on.
These actually are very sophisticated cars. You know, the Chinese tried earlier to bring cars to the West, and they weren't very good, but they've come a long way. They've hired European car designers and, you know, engineers from the West, and the cars that they're now coming up with, particularly BYD, which makes this car called the Seagull that starts at under $10,000. It's a very sophisticated car. It looks good. It has sort of a beautiful flowing dashboard that looks like a seagull's wing. It has 6 airbags. It has all the stuff you've come to expect in a modern car. It's connected. It has a touch screen that pivots. It's lovely, and it's $9,698 to start.
Give me 10 of them, right? Like, it's just kind of crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I am curious, though, as I was reading your story, I'm just thinking about, right, they cannot yet come into the U.S. market, correct?
Well, there is a very large tariff on Chinese-made automobiles in general, 27.5%, and that has been very effective at keeping most Chinese cars out. There are a few high-end Volvos and Polestars, but no, there are no Chinese EVs that you can really buy right now in the United States, but they're still having an impact.
Do we get to a point, Keith, where regulators will approve these from a safety perspective, they'll allow them on American roads, and tariffs will be such that Chinese automakers will be allowed to sell them here?
Yeah, well, there's sort of two things at play here. I mean, if there were no barriers, what the folks here in Detroit say is to bring, for example, the Seagull up to the U.S. safety specs, it would take maybe another $3,000 worth of safety equipment on that car. So then it sells for what? $13,000, $14,000?
That's crazy.
The average price of an electric vehicle in the United States is $61,000.
Wow.
So, but that's presuming that the U.S. would let them in. President Biden and former President Trump are both talking very tough about keeping the cheap Chinese EVs out. I think President Trump over the weekend suggested a 100% tariff, and President Biden is suggesting that we ban all connected Chinese cars from the United States because they could be a national security threat. Well, all cars are connected now, so that would be effectively a ban on all Chinese cars.
Help me out here, Keith. You understand this industry globally so well. How is it that they are able to make a car for so little money? Is it the labor costs that are just so much? And it just makes me wonder, are they undercutting the price because in hopes of kind of killing all of the global players that are out there, as we've seen in kind of other industries?
Yeah, it certainly, they have much lower labor costs than we do here in the United States, but there are plenty of places that have lower labor costs, like Mexico. But they've also had enormous help and support from the Chinese government. This has been a 10-year effort by the Chinese government to really control the global electric vehicle market. It was not smooth going early on, but over the years, really as they've kind of adopted Western technologies and hired Western designers and engineers, they've really come into their own. Actually, one of the people I spoke to for the article said, since Tesla arrived in China, the Chinese sort of went to school on Tesla, and they've sort of out-Tesla'd Tesla because, you know, now BYD outsells Tesla on EVs globally.
Hey, Keith, we only have 20 seconds left, but what's your prediction for how this plays out?
Well, everyone thinks they'll eventually get to the U.S., but even if they don't get to the U.S., they're already having an impact on how America is now looking at EVs. Ford is moving away from the big EVs, the big costly ones, and they're engineering 3 small EVs right now to try and take on the Chinese EVs with a starting price of $25,000.
Buy these things by the six-pack,
Kind of reminds me
Carol.
of when like Japan came into the market, right? Smaller cars, more efficient, and the U.S. makers kind of started to rethink, it feels like, what they were doing. Keith Naughton, incredible story as this ever-evolving story around the global EV race. Keith Naughton is auto reporter at Bloomberg News. Check him out at Bloomberg.com.
Another thing that startups need to look for is a market that is either started to undergo or is soon going to undergo exponential growth. I think this is actually related to one of the biggest mistakes investors make when evaluating startups. Investors always say, well, what's your growth rate? We care about the growth rate. Investors will forgive smallish revenue today if it's growing quickly. For some reason, people don't think about markets this way. But if you think about the most important startups, they are the ones that I start in small markets that are growing very, very quickly. 11 years ago, the market for iPhone apps was $0. It's now huge. And I think if you only think about the TAM today, you'll make a big mistake. What you really want to do is identify a market that's going to grow every year and be able to ride that up elevator.
Welcome to the digital age. Are you struggling to stand out here? Don't worry. Meet Blue TV, who is your digital superhero.
Blue TV is a multi-purpose online media network that also provides digital marketing services. We are based in Islamabad, Pakistan. We are expert in creative marketing, social media and digital marketing, search engine optimization, web design, page rank, and SERPs, video editing, recording and production.
So, what are you waiting for? Pick up the phone and call or WhatsApp Blue TV on given number, or visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/blue.online.tv.
With Blue TV, your business growth will be skyrocketed.
I want a bank that shows me what I spend instantly.
We're Monzo. Give us a go. See?
I want a bank that can help me budget for the things I need, like a new leather jacket for Bingo.
We can do that.
Bingo's my cockapoo.
Hi, Bingo.
It's a real faff to sign up.
It takes less than 10 minutes.
Race you.
You're on. Time's up. How'd you get on?
It's a draw.
Is it? We hear you, Bingo. You make Monzo Monzo.
My general advice is continue to seek out companies or people that are maybe one stage or two stages ahead of you. And I think this is generalizable to not just to startups, but anyone seeking fast growth in their own professional lives, in their careers too. What does greatness look like? Try to seek out people who've been there, done that before, and then try to not connect with one, but try to interview 3, 5, 10 people to see what is a general pattern of greatness that look like that will get you to the next level of the company, next stage, maybe a year, 12 months from now, 24 months from now. Seek out people who kind of went down that path a few times. Then you'll start to find this pattern that start to emerge. What are things that you need to have 12 months from now, 24 months from now that you currently don't have? Then try to build a path towards that. Almost like Amazon's or Jeff Bezos' mantra of working backwards. Think about what your end game or next stage look like, and then figure out your steps to getting there, and who do you need to work with, upgrading or coaching your existing team or recruiting from somewhere else to really level your leadership. Because ultimately, the job of a CEO is to do 3 things, right? One is get the strategy right for your company, making sure it's executed, get the right teams onboarded, getting the resources, whether it be fundraising or allocating your resources. So it's strategy, people, or team, figuring out how you need to navigate those things to get to the next level.
A decision.
Are we going to get a rate increase?
It looks like, according to a lot of what has been reported by the Japanese press, both Kyoto and Nikkei has, I think, really been owning the story that they're going to do a number of things. Move from the negative rate, which is a negative 10 basis points, to maybe 0. Doubt it moves into positive territory. Yield curve control looks like it's done. Although that's not to say that the Bank of Japan is going to will stop buying bonds. They will continue to prevent the yield curve from getting out of control. They want to maintain a little bit of stability. And the other thing that they'll dial back from is the purchase of ETFs. So there's a lot going on. It's a very historic kind of moment for them. You know, because inflation in Japan has been building. You know, we had a fascinating conversation with the Bloomberg economics economist in Japan, Taro Komura, who had been at the Bank of Japan right out of school. Whip smart guy.
Right.
And so we're starting to talk about a lot of the nuance, the policy, and I said to him at one point, I said, okay, let's put the theory aside and talk to me about the practical and what it's like being in Tokyo dealing with inflation. His answer floored me because he's of a generation that hasn't known anything but deflation. He thought inflation was something that you only, accessed in the textbooks. And one of the things that was striking to me is that there's an entire generation of investors in Japan that is adverse to putting money to work in the equity market because the assumption is things go down.
Right.
So this is a kind of a seismic shift, I think, in thinking.
It's not apples to apples, but right, how many conversations have we had over the last few years about coming off of, this easy money, no-cost money environment here in the U.S. and that having maybe a generation of younger workers on Wall Street who have never seen anything but that. And what does that mean for the investment environment when that no longer exists?
Right.
So, but
It's
in
a big
Japan,
change.
much
It's
more
a big
dramatic.
change. It's a big change.
Yeah.
Okay, I know that your focus is on the Bank of
Are
Japan.
you going to talk ramen noodles?
No,
Doug?
no,
Okay.
I'm not. We did have the CEO of Nissan USA come on, which is an $8 billion company based in Japan. But what I want to talk about is that cherry blossoms are blooming earlier. Did you see this article?
I didn't. So that's climate change?
You're exactly right. This is a Bloomberg News story from this morning. Iconic cherry trees in Japan and the U.S. are blossoming earlier as climate change brings warmer temperatures, upending a fixture of the spring calendar in major cities.
Did I see a story in the Washington Post where they're going to kind of take out some cherry trees to make way for a wall, like would amount to a seawall because of the expectations that, water levels globally are going to begin, rising? This is a phenomenal story. I mean, when you think about the loss of ice and what is locked in the ice that's going to escape into the atmosphere, methane being, the chief culprit here, which we know is far worse than carbon dioxide in terms of a greenhouse gas.
Yeah, we talked about that with Mark Ongloff.
I don't know about that, but I will say DC's cherry blossoms just hit their earliest peak bloom in 20 years.
I'm seeing them around New York now. I mean, it's typically early to see these. But yeah, you go around parts of Brooklyn, you can see them.
Yeah, climate's changing.
Yeah.
It's a
Between
thing,
1961 and 1990, cherry trees in Tokyo started blooming on March 29th on average. Between 91 and 2020, that date moved up to March 24th.
Should we be worried? Will we adapt? Can we escape this? Seems we're past the tipping point.
I was going to say we have to adapt.
question.
Yeah.
I don't think we have a choice.
Right.
Oh, yeah, it says about 150 of Washington, D.C.'s famous cherry trees near the National Mall will be removed this spring in order to repair a crumbling seawall. Doug Krisner, man, you don't miss a trick.
He doesn't.
I try not to.
You're not going to get my ramen noodles after all. All right, everybody. That's going to do it for Tim and me. Have a great Monday evening. Do not go anywhere. That's because Balance of Power, it starts right now.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lines, I'm Joe Matthew.
President Biden warns Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu a major ground operation in Rafah would be a mistake. And the leaders agree to staff-level talks here in D.C. as soon as this week. We'll discuss with Aaron David Miller of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace.
Former President Trump floats 100% tariffs on cars from China. But it's the word bloodbath in his remarks in Ohio over the weekend that got everyone talking ahead of primaries in that state and others tomorrow. Pollster Frank Luntz joins us this hour for more.
And we're just 4 days out from the deadline to avert a partial government shutdown, with a dispute over Homeland Security and border funding raising the risk that the clock runs out. As is so often the case here in Washington, Joe, it seems like we're going to take it to the last possible second.
Yes.
Midnight Friday, of course, is the deadline, and it may very well take that long or even longer to get funding across the line.
Well, that's true. It seems like every Friday lately we do this, but it could be a little bit different this time based just on the clock, on the calendar, Kaylee. They've pushed it to such a late hour now that while we await text for a bill that could fund the government. There just might not be time for lawmakers to have a chance to read it and pass this, so we could be talking about either a shutdown this weekend or a very short-term CR. We'll have to find out in the next couple of days.
Yeah, we will learn more over the remainder of this week, just as we may this remainder of this week learn more about how exactly the U.S. and Israel are communicating as it comes to what's happening in Gaza and Rafah specifically, as staff-level talks may happen by the time the week's out.
Yeah, I guess that opportunity unlocked in a phone call today with Joe Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu. It was their first in about a month. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan talked about it in the White House briefing room earlier today. Here he is.
I would say it was very businesslike. Each of them recognize that we are at a critical moment in this conflict. They share a common objective, that is for Israel to prevail over Hamas. And they have a different perspective on this operation in Rafah, and they went into some detail on that and had the opportunity really to elaborate each of their respective views in a full-throated way, in the way they always do.
Joining us now for more are Bloomberg's Nancy Cook and Michael Shepard. Thank you both so much for joining us to start this week off as we think specifically about how the week started in geopolitics, Mike, with this phone call between Biden and Netanyahu following some remarks that Netanyahu was responding to from the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer last week, calling for elections in Israel. Over the weekend, Netanyahu called that inappropriate. How important is it that not only they talked for the first time in a month, but they want their staff to talk even more? Does that signal that the relationship is still functioning or that there's real trouble in the relationship more so?
That's a great question, Kelly, and I think we're going to find out more later this week about just how functional this relationship is. The key thing that Chuck Schumer said last week may not have only been the call for elections, but he said that Israel had lost its way under Netanyahu. And that may have been the signal to Netanyahu's government that, wait a minute, maybe we are not connecting anymore with Washington in the way that we want. To be clear, the U.S. concurs still with Israel's desire to target Hamas, which has been labeled a terrorist group by the United States and by the European Union. But it is growing increasingly concerned about whether Israel, and specifically Netanyahu's government, has a plan. What is their exit strategy? And specifically, this full-scale invasion of Rafah that has been talked about, the humanitarian cost there could be incredibly high.
Well, Netanyahu talked about that speech from Chuck Schumer on Sunday morning television. Here's the prime minister on CNN with his reaction to what Chuck Schumer said.
What he said is totally inappropriate. It's inappropriate for to go to a sister democracy and try to replace the elected leadership there. That's something that the Israeli public does on its own, and we're not a banana republic. This is a wake-up call to Senator Schumer. The majority of Israelis support the policies of my government. If Senator Schumer opposes these policies, he's not opposing me. He's opposing the people of Israel.
Michael, he says it's inappropriate. It certainly is unusual for the Senate leader to make a call like that openly. It wasn't endorsed by Joe Biden, but I believe he referred to it as a good speech. How rare is this?
It's extremely rare. And also you have to consider that Chuck Schumer has been a longstanding ally of Israel. He is the highest ranking Jewish elected official in the United States. And he gave this speech from the Senate floor. He didn't just put a statement out on X or send a statement on paper from his office. It was a real moment, and he was trying to send a signal. And part of the signal he is sending is one that's coming from the Democratic base, which has grown increasingly concerned over the humanitarian toll that we've just talked about. There are more than 1 million displaced people now in Rafah. The UN today is warning of the possibility of famine across Gaza. So Chuck Schumer is seeing this and hearing from many progressive Democrats that something has to stop.
Well, and I'm sure the same goes for President Biden as he considers his own re-election effort in 2024. And of course, there also is the consideration, Nancy, of the man that he is going to be up against, who has secured the number of delegates needed to be the Republican nominee, and that is Donald Trump. Of course, there was a lot of buzz over the weekend about remarks he made in Ohio, talking about a bloodbath if he were not to win re-election, talking specifically, though, about that being true in the auto industry, and touting this idea of 100% tariffs on all cars coming from China. A lot of people got caught up on the word selection that he was using, but there was also substance in terms of the outlining of trade policies he may pursue in a second administration.
There certainly was, and I think a lot of people who watched the Ohio rally really took the bloodbath to mean that there could be potential political violence if he didn't win. His campaign really has had to spend the last 2 days cleaning up that remark and trying to clarify it and say that he was talking about, sort of the hollowing of the auto industry. It wasn't entirely clear to me exactly what he meant. I do know that it was very windy that day and the teleprompter wasn't working, and I think that made some campaign officials that I spoke to over the weekend nervous, because Trump at that point is sort of riffing and going off script. But I think that what we saw today and sort of the cleanup and the controversy surrounding the bloodbath comment is a preview of what we'll see in 2024 as Democrats are going to try to seize on every single thing Trump says to try to paint him as an extremist, outlandish, potential danger to the country. And we saw the Biden campaign put out an ad today just sort of making that case.
We heard from Donald Trump today, his legal team, that he will likely not have the money to post bond in this New York civil trial that he's dealing with, the fraud trial. Significant for someone who has promoted themselves as a billionaire, but we know this is a campaign that is bleeding cash. How bad is the situation for him as he looks at what could be the longest, or will be, general election campaign in modern history?
That's a great question. So we're going to see what the Trump campaign, how much money they've actually raised when the Federal Election Commission, the deadline to get those numbers is midnight Wednesday. So we'll have a real sense of how much money they've raised. I will tell you, covering the Trump campaign, that they have been on the hunt for money for the past few weeks, ever since he clinched the nomination, or, they thought he was coming close to it. He's been hosting dinners at Mar-a-Lago for people. His fundraiser and himself have been making tons and tons of calls, reaching out to donors across the country. I've talked to a lot of Wall Street people who have gotten calls. And so I would say right now is a moment when, they're trying to merge the campaign and the Republican National Committee and those staffs, but they're also on the hunt for big dollars.
Absolutely. And of course, we know that former President Trump has had a lot to say, specifically when it comes to congressional and executive branch efforts to deal with the border. And once again, Mike, we seem to find ourselves in a situation in which the border is the issue, specifically when it comes to funding the government beyond Midnight Friday, or at least 75% of it, because there's 6 bills that are necessary, and one, the Department of Homeland Security bill, seems to be what we're all hung up on.
Well, and it's holding up everything else as usual, and the distance between the two parties over the border remains great. And at hand is Democrats' concern that what Republicans are demanding is too extreme. Republicans, on the other hand, are seeing in this border security, the funding for border security in this legislation at hand could encourage more migrants to come by offering more detention facilities and services, including migrant care. So, look, we were supposed to see this text of the bill on Sunday. We were maybe hoping to see it today. It's not going to be today. Tomorrow is Tuesday. The House is back. We have until Friday, as you said in the opener, so they are cutting it very, very close. So as Joe, you said at the top, it may come down to an extension of government funding, or we could even see a short shutdown if they can't get their act together.
Well, you dance on the edge long enough, you might end up falling off at some point, even if it's for a couple of days. We'll find out together here on Bloomberg, and our thanks, as always, to Bloomberg's Nancy Cook and Michael Shepard for getting us started here on Balance of Power. Coming up, former President Trump responding to criticism of his use of that word, bloodbath, at a rally in Ohio over the weekend. Frank Luntz will join us to talk about this coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
if you're listening, President Xi, and you and I are friends, but he understands the way I deal, we're going to put a 100% tariff on every single car that comes across the line, and you're not going to be able to sell those cars. If I get elected, now if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole, that's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That'll be the least of it.
All right, so there you have it. Donald Trump talking to supporters in Ohio Saturday, comments that rocketed across the political spectrum as he used the word bloodbath. What did he mean? The former president responding today to criticism, to Truth Social, as he's been known to do, and writes, the fake news made a big deal out of the word bloodbath, knowing that it was about our shrinking auto manufacturing business and the fact that they use the same name all of the time. They are so bad, exclamation point. We're joined now to consider the political implications and the way the media has handled this by pollster Frank Luntz. He's the founder and CEO FIL Inc. It's great to see you, Frank. We've had a big talk the last 24 hours about context and how dare people like us bring this up knowing that this was about the auto sector. But I guess I would ask you, if that's true, in what world is there any appropriate context to be talking about a bloodbath in the wake of January 6th?
It's a great question, a great subject, a great debate, and how really pathetic it is that we're in the middle of this right now. It's not what you say that matters, it's what people hear. And the fact is there are millions of voters across the country that heard the word and thought, what exactly does he mean? I trust him at his word that he meant it about the auto industry, but the very fact that people were confused tells you the situation that we're in right now, both that he uses language that is over-caffeinated and can be misinterpreted, and that we're also extremely sensitive right now to everything that people utter. And at a time like this, it's even more important than ever that we be careful about the language that we use. Even in this interview, I'm speaking a little bit more slowly because I'm trying to measure my words to make sure I articulate this exactly as I mean. That has not been a trait of Donald Trump, not just over the last 3 years, but over the last 8 years. I do think he was misinterpreted, but the fact that he allows himself to be in that situation is something that he should pay attention to, and we all know that he doesn't.
Well, you say he's misinterpreted, Frank, and it depends on how the person receiving his comments interprets it. But isn't it true that a large portion of America has already decided what way they feel about former President Trump as an individual, and therefore how they are likely to interpret things that he says? For his supporters, this likely was more evidence that the media is working against him, trying to spin his comments into something that he did not intend. On the other side, it's a sign that he's a danger to democracy. And I just wonder how big the group is of individuals who are likely to be more considerate of what it is he's saying, trying to decipher it and make up an opinion.
It's very small. It represents perhaps 5% of the population. Even when people say they're undecided, it's not true. So right now, if you give all the different options, that you can vote for Bobby Kennedy, that you can vote for a new no labels candidate, a different independent candidate, or some of these smaller parties, even when you do that, the percentage of undecided is 5%. But the truth is, it may even be smaller because they may not have decided who they're going to vote for, but they have definitely decided who they're going to vote against. And let's say that that is 4%. There are only 8 states that are in play right now, so it's 4% of the vote times the 8 states, and that represents literally 1% of America who's going to determine the next president of the United States. When it is that small a group, surely you should be more careful with your language. Surely you should say things that aren't necessarily meant to inflame. They can still agitate. They can still be direct and honest and crystal clear. But to use a word like bloodbath, it's not necessary. And yet this is part of his campaign. And it's what those who would like to vote for him because they agree with his policies, it's what's giving them hesitation because they don't agree with his persona. And I want to emphasize that. There is a segment of America that would absolutely vote for Donald Trump because they think he was a better president than Joe Biden. But they won't vote for him because they are afraid or insulted by how he carries himself.
You know, we saw a fascinating number, Frank, in an Emerson poll. Emerson polling came out looking at Ohio. 8% of Trump voters there said they would actually vote for Sherrod Brown, the Democrat, their own senator here, and maybe there's some personal feeling about it. But we talked as well about coattails and something that we might consider reverse coattails in this case. Spencer Kimball from Emerson Polling talked about the way passion is working almost in an upside-down fashion on the ballot. Here's what he said.
What's interesting is that while Biden might lack enthusiasm on the top of the ticket, these other Democratic candidates, like Sherrod Brown, as you mentioned, has more enthusiasm. So it's almost as if these down ballots might be able to carry Biden over the finish line in some of these states.
Is that a phenomenon that you're seeing, Frank?
Yes, but it plays differently in each state. So a state like Montana, West Virginia, Trump's overwhelming popularity is going to help the candidates beneath him. And there are two important Senate races. And so often people forget that who controls the Senate determines who controls the hiring, the approval process, the vetting process for Supreme Court, for the administration, for the ambassadors. And that in some states that benefits the Republicans. In other states where Trump is not as popular, you're going to have Republicans trying to run ahead of him and maybe running separate from him. But that still doesn't change the fact that the intensity, as you correctly note, is so strong on both sides that there were very, very few people who are undecided. And a simple misuse of a word or phrase could determine the election outcome.
Frank, just quickly, we only have a minute left with you, but in Ohio in particular, as we're talking about a vulnerable incumbent in Sherrod Brown, depending on who wins the primary there tomorrow on the Republican side, how does that change Brown's odds? Who could he most easily or struggle most to beat?
Well, I've heard the argument that he wants to run against a Trump-endorsed candidate, and yet I've seen Bernie Moreno, that individual, and man, he is a good campaigner. He's got this incredible give and take with voters. You may disagree with Trump's endorsement, but as a candidate, as someone who's going to be heard, the people of Ohio can connect with someone who, like them, worked hard, played by the rules, exceeded expectations in his career. He's a businessman, a very successful one. And so while you may be focusing on Trump, his endorsement, Bernie Moreno, I think, is actually the best of the three candidates, and he's the one that Sherrod Brown should be most afraid of in November.
All right, Frank Luntz, always great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us, of course, from FIL Inc. Now, coming up, the Supreme Court hearing arguments today in a key First Amendment case relates to social media. We'll have the details with Tyler Kendall next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. The Supreme Court today heard oral arguments in a First Amendment case experts say could have implications for the 2024 election. Murthy versus Missouri is a lawsuit against the Biden administration. It focuses on the government's communications with social media companies and whether the alleged conduct went too far in trying to counter disinformation online. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall joins us now from the Supreme Court with the details. Tyler?
Hey, Kaylee, the name Murthy in this case might sound familiar because that's Vivek Murthy, the U.S. Surgeon General. He's one of numerous Biden administration officials being sued over allegations they crossed the line when it came to trying to tamp down and combat misinformation online. A group of social media users, along with two Republican attorneys general from Louisiana and Missouri, are alleging that key agencies within the Biden administration, like the CDC, essentially coerced big tech companies like Meta's Facebook and the platform formerly known as Twitter, now X, to take down posts that it disagreed with. A lot of the content in question here has to deal with the pandemic, such as the origins of COVID-19 and the efficacy around vaccines, but it also extended beyond that. For example, posts related to the validity of the 2020 election results. So the big question here is how far can the government go to encourage social media companies in their content moderating decisions and whether or not that can veer into censorship. I spoke to one expert who said there is a fine line when it comes to persuasion versus coercion. Take a listen to what he told me.
What the court has to do in this case is to draw a line that polices the government and make sure the government isn't coercing or trying to censor content with which it disagrees, while at the same time allowing the government to provide facts or provide information that allow platforms to make better moderation decisions.
The government is appealing the last ruling. That was from the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which found the Biden administration asked for a specific post to be removed and pressed the companies to change their content moderation policies. The court felt officials threatened legal consequences if there wasn't compliance, such as reforms to liability under Section 230 and antitrust enforcement. The government says it's entitled to share information, particularly when it's in the public's safety interest. And they also say that there was no coercion. Now, I want you guys to take a listen to one of the key conservative justices today signaling that he's reluctant to impose any restrictions when it comes to the government's communications with social media companies. Take a listen here.
In my experience is the United States, in all its manifestations, has regular communications with the media to talk about things they don't like or don't want to see or complaining about factual inaccuracies.
Now, Joe and Kaylee, we're not expecting a decision in the... But of course, that just takes us closer to November and the general election.
All right, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall. We thank you, Tyler, for bringing that to us, and we'll let you know what happens in this case. Coming up, we'll be joined by Aaron David Miller, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace Senior Fellow, as we continue the conversation about our relationship with Israel, the president's policies in Israel and Gaza. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
The two leaders discussed the latest developments in Israel and Gaza, and they spoke about the state of Israel's military operations. The president emphasized his bone-deep commitment to ensuring the long-term security of Israel, and the president has repeatedly made the point that continuing military operations need to be connected to a clear strategic endgame.
That was Jake Sullivan, U.S. National Security Advisor, earlier today discussing details of a call between President Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the first time they'd spoken in over a month. Let's bring in now Aaron David Miller, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace Senior Fellow, who is joining us now. Aaron, thank you so much for being with us. Jake Sullivan also said today that the president warned a major ground operation in Rafah would be a mistake, but I wonder how far warnings go if they don't come with consequence. Would Netanyahu really face any consequence for not abiding by the words of the Biden administration?
Thanks for having me, Kaylee. Look, the key here is Netanyahu is not a lone actor. He's backed up by the vast majority of the Israeli public, who probably are in favor of a ground campaign in Rafah to deal with the last 4 battalions of Hamas's organized military structure and to close down the tunnels that link Rafah to Sinai. He's also going to be supported by Benny Gantz, who's a member of the War Cabinet, perhaps, according to the polls, a putative successor prime minister if, in fact, elections were held today. So he's not a lone actor here. I think, though, that the fact that the administration is going to receive, and the Israelis are willing to send, a senior delegation to talk about alternatives to a ground campaign, or at least to give the Israelis a chance to explain precisely what they intend to do and how they intend to deal with the reality of a military campaign in and among 1.3 million people sandwiched into a tiny slice of Gaza, which is only twice the size of the District of Columbia. So your question is absolutely right. I think that the Biden administration has been following what I call a passive-aggressive policy toward Israel. A lot of tough talk, a lot of genuine anger, understandably, but with little intention, seems to me so far, 6 months of this war, to impose a significant cost or consequence on Israel.
How about the relationship between these two men, Aaron, Joe Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu, at the beginning of the conflict when the White House was starting to get criticism here? Joe Biden said you just have to hug him as closely as you can. They didn't talk in over a month, we were told today when this meeting took place. Will it be another month before they speak again?
Good question, Joe. I think the president is increasingly aware of the fact that he's not dealing with the old risk-averse Benjamin Netanyahu, the guy who took one step forward, a step to the side, one step back. Biden's now dealing with a risk-ready Benjamin Netanyahu, who's on trial for bribery, fraud, and breach of trust, who's desperate, who understands that when this war ends, without a significant victory, if that is the case, that he is due for an accounting on behalf of the opposition and the public of Israel, who's going to hold him responsible for the worst terror attack in Israel's history and the bloodiest day for Jews since the end of the Nazi Holocaust. So I think that I think it's a broken relationship, frankly, and I think Netanyahu, eager to play to Republicans and to the presumptive Republican nominee, as the 2024 presidential election campaign heats up, it would not surprise, as it did in 2015, when then Prime Minister Netanyahu interceded and undermined then President Barack Obama and his efforts to reach a nuclear agreement with Iran. I think you could see a repeat of that in the months ahead.
It's interesting you raised the idea that he may be held in the books of history as responsible for what happened on October 7th. And I wonder also if he would want the responsibility on his shoulders of the remaining hostages still being held by Hamas to not come home by not reaching some kind of temporary ceasefire agreement, with all of these parties still trying to negotiate toward that effort. Can it happen if it hasn't happened already? Does it just get more complicated, more difficult to reach that point as time goes on and potentially there is movement in Rafah? There's more frustration on the part of the Biden administration?
We have 134 hostages, Kaylee. 30 or more of them, the Israelis believed, were either killed on October 7th and brought to Gaza, their bodies to trade for the release of Palestinian prisoners, or killed in captivity. I think the prime minister is under pressure certainly from the families. And here's where Benny Gantz, who has been pushing for a hostage deal for months now, may come into play. If, in fact, the negotiations are now ongoing in Qatar with the Americans, maybe not yet with the Americans, between the Israelis, the Qataris, the Egyptians, and representatives of Hamas, I think if there's a reasonable deal on the table, there is a chance, perhaps before the end of Ramadan, to get a limited hostage release. Probably 35, 40, the women, the elderly, and the infirm, in exchange asymmetrically, probably for several hundred Palestinian prisoners. One of the contention points is that Hamas wants at least 100 of those to be Palestinians who were either charged or convicted of killing Israelis, which is going to be a tough sell for the Israeli prime minister. So I think there is very much the possibility of such a deal. And I think the administration, we're kind of in a race. Are we going to get an Israeli hostage deal before the end of Ramadan, or are we going to get a ground campaign in Rafah? I think those are the competing trends, and I'm hoping for the former.
Well, if we did get the former, then, Aaron, would it forestall the latter? Would that mean no need for an invasion of Rafah if the terms of that ceasefire were appropriate?
You know, Hamas will be left with 50 hostages, male civilians and members of the Israeli Defense Forces. Those 50 hostages are Hamas's insurance card. And what Hamas will want to trade would be more Palestinian prisoners, but even more withdrawal, significant redeployment of Israeli forces from Gaza, and some sort of permanent ceasefire. Even if the Israelis could be persuaded to agree to a permanent ceasefire to get those hostages back, I think Israel has every intention, as they did in the wake of Munich after the killing of 11 Israeli athletes by Fatah's Black September Palestinian group. They have every intention of identifying and hunting down the key architects of the October 7 terror surge. So even a limited deal or one that would trade final hostages is not going to secure a stable Gaza. We're in for some very tough months ahead.
Aaron, thank you for joining us. Aaron David Miller, Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. It's good to talk with you, as always. Coming up, former President Trump trying to clarify the bloodbath comment over the weekend, and our political panel will react next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's not what you say that matters, it's what people hear. And the fact is, there are millions of voters across the country that heard the word and thought, what exactly does he mean? I trust him at his word that he meant it about the auto industry, but the very fact that people were confused tells you the situation that we're in right now, both that he uses language that is over-caffeinated and can be misinterpreted.
Over-caffeinated. Pollster Frank Luntz talking with us a short time ago, founder and CEO of FIL Inc., reacting to Donald Trump's controversial bloodbath comments on Saturday. This is from a speech in Ohio, and joining us now, our political panel. Back with us, Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, and Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University. Great to see you both with us. Hope you both had a great St. Patrick's Day weekend. This is somewhat exhausting already. We're going to do this for 8 months, apparently. We're getting a lot of emails and tweets from people who don't like the way the media are handling this particular story. And we're all about context at Bloomberg. We've tried to play the former president's remarks in full, even if he was talking about the auto industry. Is that a reason to be forgiving use of the term like this, considering the climate we're in?
Yeah, I think it's a different standard for Donald Trump, right? I mean, first of all, he doesn't have credibility because half of what he says on the stage isn't true, right? And so to then apply a different measure to what he says after he gets off the stage, I mean, like, how can you tell what he really meant? He likes to put the hot words out on the table, right? He likes to inspire people to do things that nobody else would even contemplate. So when he uses terms like that, you have to assume he is sending a message, whether it's specific to auto workers or whether it's specific to his supporters or anybody else. Yep. This is what he does. We shouldn't be surprised. We shouldn't be shocked. But it is a legitimate thing to talk about because we are in a period of enormous amounts of political violence happening in the United States. Just last week, the Maricopa County supervisors were attacked by Trump supporters, screaming that this is an insurrection, this is a revolution. They took over the dais, they ran them out of the room, they had to call the sheriffs. Wow. This is the kind of thing that his supporters are doing every single day. If we don't report on it, then it's just enabling folks who are actually out to be more anarchists than political operatives.
Well, it raises just kind of the broader specter then, Jeannie, of the concept of civil unrest around this election. And we've seen polling that suggests majorities of Americans do have concerns about violence that may surround the election, although it's worth pointing out that goes on both sides. This idea that whatever side loses may not take that peacefully. How are you thinking about this as we have 8 months to go between now and November? As Rick says, you're already seeing instances of it. Just how bad could it get?
You know, I think I'm not alone in thinking it could get very bad. And of course, language like Donald Trump was using over the weekend sort of further enforces that idea. But you know, what I was really thinking when I heard what he had to say is there's a new book out called White Rural Rage, which the two authors, respected reporter and a scholar, talk about the research on rural supporters, in particular of Donald Trump, and the rage that they have long felt. And the idea is that Donald Trump channels that rage. And so, you know, I understand what the viewers Joe was talking about is saying, because the frustration that a lot of people feel is that his supporters are in on this joke. They want people who they see as in the establishment, and that includes the media, to be all shocked and surprised by what he has to say. And that is really a problem that we're going to see, and that's why he continues to play this game. So I think we should also focus an equal amount of attention on the policies that he's talking about. 100% tariff on automobiles. This is a man talking about Joe Biden's economy, which is one of the strongest in the world. What would that do to our economy? That's one of the most important things that we buy in our lifetimes besides a house, and one of the most expensive, a car, and he's going to put a tax on it for 100%. So let's equal this out with a focus on the policies as well.
Well, we can also refer to some of the other things that were said in that speech. It was a stem winder here. You know, so much attention is paid to the bloodbath. The tariff doesn't get the coverage that it deserves, if that's even real. But he also talked about the border and used references to immigrants that might have been new level here, telling supporters that other countries are sending gang members to the United States, quote, "I don't know if you call them people in some cases," he said. "They are not people, in my opinion," going on to refer to migrants as animals. And that's not even getting a notice.
You know, this level of prejudice is phenomenal at any stage of a campaign. But now that we're in the general election,
nominee.
so he is the nominee of the Republican Party and will be at the convention held later this summer. It's the first time I've ever seen the Washington Post say, you know, they do these Pinocchios, right? You know,
Yes.
so your nose gets longer if you tell a lie.
Right.
They add Pinocchios up depending upon how many lies you've told. They did an entire page off of this one rally. I mean, there must have been 8 or 9 Pinocchios.
That's a lot of Pinocchios.
That came out of that speech. We could talk about that rally all year long and not cover all aspects of it that are either offensive or not true. And so is this a strategy into itself, right? I mean, if you just drill everything down to the lowest common denominator, where you pit people against one another, then you just divide the room. Okay, here are the people I didn't insult this year, and they're going to vote for me because I told them that it's them versus the others that I have insulted. And that's the politics that Trump is bringing to the table. And if we ignore it at our peril as a political system.
Well, it also begs the question of whether the Biden campaign is, if not outright ignoring it, being a bit too complacent, Jeannie, as we talk about language selection, the idea that he is characterizing entire groups of people in this way. His own vice president that served under his administration within the last several days said that he would not endorse him in this election cycle. All of these things could be true, and yet he is still winning. When you look at polling across not just the United States as a whole, but in the key swing states that are going to decide this election, what does it say that Biden is still losing right now if the polls are to be believed?
You know, I think partly what it says is Biden and his team need to use this huge amount of money. They've had a big fundraising take. It's historic in proportion. They've got to get on the airwaves and start fighting back. They have got to get out there and describe Donald Trump as the threat that he is to American democracy, to our pocketbooks, and to everything else. So, you know, they're going to have to get out there and make the case that he's a threat, and they are going to have to get out there and make a case that he is a threat to all that Joe Biden has been able to achieve, and there are enormous achievements there. But I think we also have to ask ourselves why it is that this dehumanizing language, the lies, and the outrageous statements that he makes don't turn off his voters. And the reason is these people feel like the political parties for decades have let them down. They aren't expecting much from Donald Trump except to scream back to the establishment that they have been let down, and they are screaming back. And you go to those rallies, they feel like they are in on a joke at the rest of the expense of the establishment, as they describe it. And this is going to continue for another 8 or 9 months.
It's going to be a long 8 or 9 months indeed, if the last just several days is any indication. Jeannie Sheehan Zaino and Rick Davis, thank you both, and stick with us because coming up, we have to talk about the fact that 4 days from now, we're facing another partial government shutdown deadline, and the border is a sticking point. Rick and Jeannie will be back with us shortly. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Lawmakers had planned to release the text of the last batch of spending bills to fund the government last night. And 24 hours later, we still have no text. The hang-up is over the Department of Homeland Security funding and the border specifically. Back with us now, Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, and Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University. And almost as if on cue, Jeannie, we got this afternoon a letter from the House Freedom Caucus that reads in part, the House must put forward an appropriations measure that forces the inclusion of the core elements of H.R. 2, going on to say, we ask you to join us in rejecting the appropriations package or anything similar that would directly fund the Biden administration's disastrous policy. So once again, Jeannie, it seems to be all about the border, and whether or not it's because of the House Freedom Caucus or something else, is the border going to be what causes a shutdown midnight Friday?
It absolutely could. And Kaylee, did you just say H.R. 2? Are we actually back to H.R. 2? It's, it's mind-numbing how this has worked. We are 6 months almost into the year, and they are still battling. But yeah, I suspect if we do have a partial shutdown, even if it's short and it happens Friday night at midnight, it'll be over the border. Huge surprise. And by the way, to all our Republican friends, they could have looked at the Senate bill and passed that, and we wouldn't be in this position, but here we go again.
And here we go again with a calendar problem. Even if there's a deal tonight, and there could be, to Kaylee's point, we keep hearing there's going to be text, but nobody ever seems to finish their homework. You've got a 72-hour rule in the House that's got to go to the Senate. We're going to have a little shutdown this weekend at least, aren't we?
Yeah, well, what you might get is what they did last time, which is a short-term CR, a couple of days, half a week. And stick around next week.
And that's allowed if it's short?
Yeah, I think
nobody gets fired.
I mean, look, the reality is everything's allowed with 300 votes, right? And they've got 300 votes for getting a bill passed. So the reality, though, and I just want to remind everybody, there was a deal going into the weekend on this package for Homeland Security. And the people who screwed it up were the White House. They were on the call on Sunday and said, no, we've got to have more money for the border and for beds and detention facilities. Yeah. And that was a new ask. That didn't exist before. And when that got put on the table, everybody walked away from a deal. So, I know everybody's got blood on their hands, just to use a blood phrase, since that's the thing to do today. And House Democrats, House Republicans, everybody has dropped the ball on this. But in this case, I think it's the Biden administration overreaching now on border because they thought they could catch the Republicans at their own game. We asked for more money and we were denied it. I think they're overplaying their hand, and I think it's going to result in potentially a short-term government shutdown. Well,
Jeannie, what do you think? Could this backfire for the president?
I think it could, but I think when it comes to the border, the White House feels like it was stalled by the Republicans is the kindest way to put it. They didn't go forward when they should have because of the urging of Donald Trump. And so they're going to have to own where we are today. And we also heard over the weekend that they would potentially veto a CR. So I think they feel comfortable that the blame will not lie on their shoulders. And oh, by the way, Republicans agree we need money for the border. So they really, really have to move forward on this, and they really shouldn't be pushing back on the White House at this point.
It's funny to think you've got members of the administration pitching the 2025 budget plan on Capitol Hill now. At the same time, we're trying to figure out how the heck to finish this fiscal year. Once they get this done, it's going to happen sooner or later, with or without a shutdown. Is the store closed in a campaign year?
Joe, there's a reason Congress has an approval rating of basically family animals in their staffers. It's like sub 10% in some places. So, yeah, I mean, I think the public gets it with them. And I don't think there's going to be much of an effort between now and Election Day to try and get much more serious legislation passed. You'll get some work done, but I wouldn't count on seeing that budget passed for 2025 before inaugural day.
There you have it. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano with the baseline to start another interesting week in Washington. Kaylee, we're going to have a lot to cover here with the countdown clocks starting between now and Friday.
Absolutely. And as always, you can get your updates in the Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online, and of course right here on Balance of Power.
You said it. Thank you for joining us here on Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg TV and Radio. We'll see you back here tomorrow.